And welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we bring rational discourse back to our national dialogue. From Manchester, New Hampshire, I am Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Eric.
And we have a guest on the podcast this week, a very special guest. We have Alex Johnson with us. Alex is a researcher specializing in online misinformation, a former fact-checker with a master's in communication psychology from the London School of Economics. She's currently a senior research officer at the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We really appreciate this. Obviously, misinformation is becoming an increasing part of our daily lives, which is kind of depressing, but it is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, it seems, and for so many of us, myself included, I don't know as much about it as I would like to, and so I'm hoping that we can kind of soak up some of your expertise on this subject here. But first and foremost, can you just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start researching into misinformation?
Yeah, sure. So I have a bit of a strange background for this particular field in that I started off my career as an actor. I lived in Los Angeles for a few years and was doing some screen acting then. And then the pandemic happened, and like so many people, I lost sort of all the things I was doing, just sort of stopped. And I was all of a sudden like had this moment to sort of sit back and look at the world around me. And I watched in real time as misinformation was like fracturing relationships, undermining public health, destabilizing the like country that I loved, and was just so, it just felt like this, like it was the underlying problem of everything. You know, it just felt like it was the thing that was driving all of the things I was worried about, and the things that people I cared about worried about. And so I got sort of obsessed with this as a problem, and I started doing I had a online fact-checking community called the Factivists, where I started doing fact checks sort of by request, that like my friends, and it started out with just like my friends and family, and then strangers on the internet would start asking me like, oh, can you explain this, or can you tell me more about this? And I have always been a person who loves doing research and loves trying to like figure things out and sort of understand things on a deeper level. And so it just became what I was spending all my time doing. And then that led me to pursue some more training in public policy and fact-checking and open source intelligence. I ended up doing a job for a while where I was doing social media background checks for like the TSA and random school districts and like police officers and all kinds of people. And then eventually I was like, okay, I think this is what I want to do, and went to London. Like you've mentioned, I have my master's degree in communication psychology at the London School of Economics, and really focused on misinformation and online hate speech and sort of how this new technology is affecting how we communicate with each other, which has now led me to the Center for Countering Digital Hate, where now I focus more on holding platforms accountable for the harms that they create.
That's fantastic. Can you briefly go into a bit of like the mission behind the Center for Countering Digital Hate and how your work fits into that mission?
Yeah, sure. So the Center for Countering Digital Hate is basically a big tech watchdog. We basically expose the harms that these big companies perpetrate or even encourage, and so our mission is basically to protect human rights and civil liberties in digital spaces. My work within that is on the research team. So our research is very focused on putting numbers to these problems, being able to say, oh, this is why this is bad. Here is the proof that we have. Then we can give that to press or to we can give that to policymakers and be like, here are the things that we need to change. Here's the ways that this kind of lies and hate can genuinely impact our society, as well as just generally showing how these platforms don't even follow their own policies. So yeah, it's less about showing what people are doing online and more about showing what the platforms are doing. We don't want to focus on telling people not to say things. That's not the thing. It's about making sure that these platforms are that there's a cost to the stuff they do, even if it's just a cost of bad press. Yeah.
Are there specific platforms, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, are there specific platforms that are kind of holding up their end of the bargain better, per se, than others?
I wish I could say yes. Not really. There's platforms that are certainly trying harder. I think like Blue Sky is sort of a new player on the scene. They don't have nearly the sort of amount of people that other social media platforms are, but thus far they seem to have been taking the idea of hate and misinformation quite seriously. And YouTube goes back and forth. They they build really strong policies that are really informed by real world researchers and people who are experts in different types of problems. Like they have a really strong and well thought out policy on eating disorder content, but they don't really enforce it. So it's not. Unfortunately, there's not like a, yeah, absolutely, somebody's nailing it answer to that question. And obviously we've seen how since January this year, Meta has rolled back a lot of their policies and are actively sort of getting worse on a lot of this stuff. So it's not a super hopeful outlook right now in terms of what we're getting from the actual platforms.
Yeah, you kind of answered this question, but I was curious, how have you seen like the trend kind of go over the last, say, 10 years or so? Like, has the trend led to more accountability from these platforms or less accountability? How have you kind of seen that change?
There's sort of been ups and downs. I think that on the upside, 10 years ago, most people hadn't really heard the term misinformation, didn't really care about it, didn't think it was a problem. And now I think that has definitely changed. I think people have this sort of sense of, oh, there's something going on here. These platforms aren't just, oh, we're looking online to talk to our friends. There is content being pushed to us and that it feels manipulative. But I also think that in general, most of these social media companies have slowly but surely cut their trust and safety teams and cut down the amount of people involved in trust and safety decisions, and have rolled back policies and tried to take away researcher transparency. Even just when I started the job I'm currently at, which was like a little less than 2 years ago, the amount of access we had to data was better than it is now. They are slowly making it harder and harder for anybody to do research on this because they don't like what people are finding. Yeah.
Can you, in your experience, what makes misinformation and particularly this hate-fueled misinformation spread so rapidly online? And I guess my question is it more about the technology itself and the platforms, the algorithms, or is it really just human psychology? Do we really just lean into following things that make us angry or incite anger and hatred in us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a fusion of both. I think the issue is that the technology is taking advantage of our psychology. That psychologically, our brains are wired to prioritize emotionally charged content, particularly things that make us feel like we might be in danger, either from like a just, my identity is being challenged, but also from like somebody might hurt me or somebody I love. that kind of stuff. And that makes sense that those kind of emotions trigger fast intuitive thinking so that we can defend ourselves. That's like the evolutionary reason, right? But that fast intuitive thinking also sort of bypasses our critical analysis. So we are much more likely to believe things if they trigger that. But technologically, these platforms are built to maximize engagement. They're built to keep you on the platform as long as they possibly can. And so their algorithms detect when we have those sort of reactions because we stay on those posts longer, or we share them with our friends because we're like, look, see what they're doing, or see what's happening. Somebody has to tell you about this because it feels so emotionally charged for us. And the result is this basically feedback loop of our cognitive biases mate a system that's designed to exploit them. And that's not an accident. That's the business model. That's on purpose. This outrage is profitable. And that's something the social media companies know and have no real reason to not exploit. So while misinformation might feel like it's a human problem because misinformation has been around forever, the way that it's spreading and the way that it's becoming this sort of society-defining thing is that it's being supercharged by these technological systems that incentivize it and amplify it and normalize it.
Living in London, you kind of have a unique perspective in kind of seeing things through like a different lens than we do. You know, us being in the States, and of course, most all of our viewers being in the States as well, you know, we traditionally are looking at misinformation through a largely American lens because it feels like it impacts us so close to home. But you know, I think most of us will recognize that there is a more global issue surrounding misinformation. Do you find that the misinformation crisis is especially prevalent in the US compared to other developed nations? How is it, if it's different, how is it different in in other nations? And are there other nations whose governments are addressing it differently or maybe even better than others?
Yeah, so I think the misinformation crisis is absolutely global. I'm like you said, I'm based in London, and there's plenty of mis and disinformation that spreads here. We just did a follow-up report pretty recently on the Southport riots, which I don't know if you all remember. It was about a year ago, but basically a man walked into a dance studio and stabbed 3 little girls, which was obviously horrific. And the social media immediately exploded with a lot of people saying that this man who did this was a Muslim illegal immigrant. That wasn't true. He was neither Muslim nor an illegal immigrant. But that didn't really matter because this had exploded online, and then there was these riots that happened all across the UK. So there is absolutely disinformation here, and there's disinformation, I think, increasingly in a lot of countries, and we're seeing more and more fact-checking organizations pop up in the global south and all across Europe. So I think that it is definitely a problem across the world. But that being said, my own perspective, being an American, I do think that the U.S. has a different level of a problem. And I don't think it's like something that has to do with our media ecosystem or anything like that. I think it is sort of the culture of our politics, that our politics does have this sort of us versus them dynamic that has kind of always been there and allows for this stuff to be like actively spewed by politicians themselves in a big way. There's an essay, and I feel like I bring it up to everybody I know because I think it's brilliant, called The Paranoid Style in American Politics, where Richard Hofstadter describes this recurring pattern in American history where there's this style of political expression that's marked by suspicion and conspiracy thinking, and he uses the word Manichaeanism, which no one's ever used, but like basically means this idea of dark versus light and good versus evil that is so wired into our politics. And I think the crazy part about that essay is that it was written in 1964. Like, that is not this is not a new thing. That is so built into, I think, the way that our political rhetoric works. So I think that misinformation can take hold easier and faster here, or not here in the U.S. I don't currently live there, but yeah, yeah. And then what was the last part? Oh, what governments are addressing it more adequately than others? There is like some hopefulness. The platforms themselves have not made a lot of progress in their own accountability, but several countries have started to make legislation that is designed to hold platforms accountable. The EU's Digital Services Act is starting to go into effect, and basically it's reframes platform responsibility by requiring them to do risk assessments and transparency reporting, and basically treating disinformation not just as speech but as a systemic design failure. And that's the kind of policy approach we probably need in more places. That being said, it's new and we don't really know how well it's going to work. The OSA in the UK is similar, the Online Safety Act. It also is going to create more consequences for platforms that don't have a certain level of transparency, and that they have to actively describe their plans and their algorithms and those sorts of things to the satisfaction of the UK government and to the EU Parliament. So I think there are countries that are trying now. I think at this point, it's still too early to tell how effective that will be. But CCDH has had a fair amount of input into those pieces of legislation. We've at least gotten to report our evidence to the people in charge, and it's we are hopeful, I think, that these kinds of things will make a difference.
It's really interesting. I especially want to kind of double back to your comment about the kind of the American political system and this idea of like light versus dark, right versus wrong, very, very clear set boxes that we have in the United States that, yeah, does feel very American in a lot of ways. And it's a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is how we can kind of break out of this mindset that there is only one right answer and that anyone that disagrees with you is inherently inferior or wrong. And that exists, across the political spectrum. But it brings up a guest that we had a few months back, Chad Sunman, who was talking about evangelical community and how it's so easy for them to believe in things like QAnon or things like that. There's again this conspiracy of like pedophile Democrats and all of this, like that they're drinking the blood and all of this. And I mean, these are the things. Look, these are things I've been getting questions from people in my hometown about for years. Like, is this real? What have you heard about this? I mean, adrenochrome, I didn't know what that word meant. That's like, it's wild stuff that comes out of some of these conspiracy theories. I guess my question, though, is because I also see it, that's largely kind of right-wing fodder. At least that's generally how it's viewed, though I don't think it's solely people who identify as right-wing who believe these things. But there's certainly issues relating to misinformation, disinformation, hate, specifically, like digital hate. Across the political spectrum in the U.S., do you find that there is a political divide where it is impacting certain groups more frequently, or is it really just impacting all of us across the spectrum kind of equally and we don't even realize it?
Yeah, so this is definitely a debate even amongst misinformation scholars. Is there is this hypothesis of a political asymmetry amongst misinformation and conspiracy belief, and people tend to think that there is more conspiratorial thinking, at the very least, amongst conservatives. That being said, the most recent article I read on it was somebody did a big literature review talking about all of the articles that have tried to look at this political asymmetry, and basically what they found is that not necessarily. It's not a strong enough effect to say with certainty that like conservatives are affected more. What you can say is that the Republican Party as it exists right now, there are more political leaders that are willing to say things that are provably false. And so I think as the Republican Party...
I hadn't noticed.
I mean, it can be a controversial thing to say, but I think that because everyone always is like, well, politicians all lie. Sure, but the lies that politicians say are not created equal, right? Some people say things that are actively provably false. Some people say things that sort of skirt the truth, that sort of bend the truth. And the actively provably false tends to be more conservative at this point in history. But yeah, I think that it is important to remember that misinformation doesn't respect party lines. Like there is absolutely all kinds. Like, I always have this. One of the reasons I sort of got into this misinformation space started with, like I said, during the pandemic and the racial justice protests in 2020. There was so much misinformation around the police and police action related to all of the stuff with George Floyd and particularly with Breonna Taylor. But I remember I had this discussion with one of my friends who's somebody who I really respected the opinion of and really was like, yeah, this is a very rational person. But they were had posted something about how Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed, which isn't true. She was shot in her hallway. It may seem like a minor distinction. And what she kept saying to me is that doesn't matter. The point is that it's horrible. And I'm like, yeah, but it does matter, because what we're talking about here is the difference between it being the fault of police brutality and the fault of a no-knock warrant. And ultimately, Breonna Taylor's death was the fault of a no-knock warrant. It was a horrific tragedy, and the police are responsible for it. But what happened is that they broke into her house in the middle of the night, and so she reacted as if someone was breaking into her house, as did her boyfriend, and they tried to defend themselves. It wasn't that the police broke into her bedroom and she was still asleep and they shot her while she was sleeping. Those are two different stories, and the difference between them does matter in terms of finding solutions that can actually prevent this kind of thing from happening again. So I think that, I think often what I hear from when people on the left about these issues is this sort of sense of it's injustice. It doesn't matter what exactly the injustice is. But it does. And I think sometimes people on the left are even more resistant to being corrected because they don't think misinformation is a problem for people on the left.
I think that's a great point. I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah.
I have in recent weeks have been kind of, I don't want to say sparring, but people who I am especially close with, who are, again, brilliant people, who are now kind of spewing election denialism relating to the last election, which I think is dangerous. I thought it was dangerous when it was the other side doing that several years ago. And essentially, I mean, I'm being called dangerous for saying that I don't think the last election was stolen, and that I thought it was a pretty easy election to predict. Sorry, just gonna pat myself on the back. I did predict it here when plenty of those people thought that I was crazy. I was not happy about the results, admittedly, but I find that I'm struggling more with some of that, because it is people who have largely for years been the ones kind of fact-checking these situations, and now I'm kind of saying, no, this is not accurate. I'm also seeing that I got sent a video of Trump speaking, and they were like, this is Trump admitting that he stole the last election, and it's AI. Again, it's not even AI. It's not even AI. This is just something that's taken out of context, where he's talking about the 2020 election having been stolen. And if you're looking at it without the lens of oh, this confirmation bias of what I already believe.
Yeah.
It's very obvious that he's talking about the 2020 election. If it hadn't been stolen, then I would be away. I would be gone by now. But now you have me for 4 more years. But they look at that, they see that out of context, and it's just tons of comments on it about people being like, they're saying the
proof.
quiet part out loud, this is proof, all of this.
Yeah.
And then there's like a few people who chime in and say, I don't think that's what he's actually saying here, and then angry comments at those people for, streams and streams.
It's like this idea, and I think you said it perfectly, that, and this is, again, more prevalent on the left, I think, where there's like a sense of entitlement that, like, well, my crusade against Trump is so important that these little things, I say in quotation marks, these little things don't matter.
Yeah.
Because what matters is that we knock him down, right? What matters is that we defeat him. So, like, who cares if I got this little tiny thing wrong, or this is a little bit out of context, because I feel like, and again, the very black and white, good versus evil religious argument that we were talking about earlier, that's kind of that argument coming into reality, where people feel like, well, I'm in the right wholly, so that doesn't really matter, because like what matters is we defeat him. And I've heard that defense from people on the left, like to my face, like, who cares? We have to get rid of him. Like, who cares about that? Like, why are you worried about that?
Right.
Well, because it matters. And like you said, like the Breonna Taylor thing's a great example, because while people who are very appalled by the unfortunate death and like the wrongdoings that led to that, yes, those things were bad and need correcting, but like the thing that needs to be corrected is going to be very different depending on the facts of the case. And if you get the facts wrong, you're going to be correcting the wrong thing. And when you look at like the nuts and bolts of it, 'cause, I work in public service and with the city, and like the things that we have to do, especially with like LAPD, like the things that we have to change are so different depending on those very small differences. And so they make a big deal because, we can address police brutality, say in this case, right? If we're saying it's purely a police brutality situation, we can address that with trainings, with this and with that. We can do all these things that we have been doing, at least here, and other police departments have been doing. But, because we got this one little detail wrong through misinformation, what we're doing isn't even really going to help, actually, because we're not actually addressing the root cause of this specific incident, which if we knew it and if we accepted that as fact, then we would actually be able to address it. But because we don't, like, we're just basically wasting money so much, because it is important to deal with those things, but we're not addressing the right root cause. And as a result, it's not going to help situations like that from happening, or prevent situations like that from happening again. But, I think this is a great time to kind of talk about strategy here. We're talking about kind of like our experiences talking to people. And I think, at least for me specifically, I think one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen, and this is mostly talking with people from the right, but again, like I've seen it more and more in discussions with people from the left, at least recently, is that I feel like in trying to combat disinformation by speaking to people who have been disinformed, who have absorbed this media that is wrong and believe it wholly, from whatever news station they might be getting it from or website. I think from a lot of people, when you try to correct them, it almost always kind of feels like it's like you're speaking down at them. Right, you're like, well, I have this like proper knowledge. Do your research, and it really feels like we're like talking down at them and belittling them, because it kind of is like doing that. Like when you address it that way, you basically are belittling them by telling them they're dumb for like believing this information. Here is correct information, and more often than not, that approach leads to them closing a door. Right, the person you're speaking to, whether it's left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. Like when you speak to someone that way, you're really pushing them away, because like nobody wants to be spoken that way. It's rude. It's frankly rude to like to be like, I'm smart and you're dumb, because you drank the Kool-Aid and whatever. Like it's very rude. So
where are you from? What accent was that? What?
I'm smart and you're dumb.
What was that?
Whatever.
Someone who has never been to the South speaking, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly.
Not from the South. But no, I think a lot of people kind of have that natural presence when they try and address misinformation, and it clearly doesn't work. So I guess the question being, what's a strategy that you've seen that can actually work to reduce the influence of this misinformation, to actually like change someone's mind and like help them, understand that they have to do more research or that they are victims of misinformation without putting them down, without making them feel like they're being belittled or really infringing on their like essence of free speech and all these things? Like, what can you say to like strategies be in addressing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the big question, right? Is how do we make a difference, and particularly with misinformation, it is a difficult question. I think on a personal level, when you're actually talking to people, the strategies I've seen these are mostly de-radicalization strategies, but I think they also work for less radical misinformation. Is first of all, find something to agree with them on. If someone starts talking about QAnon, be like, yeah, that it is horrific that sex offenders would do things like that, like blah blah blah. Like give them something that you agree with them on, and then ask questions. Ask questions like that are poking holes. Be like, so why do you think that somebody like Obama would be involved in this, but someone like Trump wouldn't be? Like, or why do you think, like try to pick little pieces apart, and that is going to give you a better chance of maintaining a relationship with that person, and then sort of having an actual open dialogue. So then the next sort of step is then to start sharing good information when you can. If you have information from a source you trust, from like journalists or particular institutions that you trust, then you can share that information and share why you trust it. Don't just share information from Reuters and be like, I trust it because it's good media. Be like, give like your actual thoughts behind why it's good media. Talk about what media you trust and why, and how you feel that is affecting you. I think that's quite useful in terms of a person-to-person approach. In terms of a societal approach, I think don't share information you don't for sure know is true. I think that sounds easier than it is, because I think a lot of times we're like, well, I don't ever share false information. Of course I don't, but I've seen at least 5 of my friends share that video of the bunnies jumping on the trampoline, which is just AI. It just 100% is AI. And they're like, oh my God, so cute. And obviously that's a very innocuous example, but just think before you share it. Take a second, and don't share the things unless you are sure it's true. It can be hard, particularly in moments of crisis, and particularly in moments right now, like where there are crazy things happening in the news all the time. I think it's very easy for us to believe, Trump just declared himself king. It's like, no, probably not. He may have said something that was upsetting, and somebody has made a headline, and it's not a good thing. Don't share it. Take a second, look it up. And then an even bigger, we're going to go through levels here. The next level up would be, there's a great theory that was probably my main focus of my master's degree was inoculation theory, which is basically the idea of creating a psychological vaccine for misinformation, that you expose people to tactics used to mislead them, like scapegoating or emotional manipulation, and you explain how those tactics are used. And this gives them like a little bit of cognitive antibodies that then can prevent them from being manipulated by the next time they see misinformation. And it's in a lab setting, it is shockingly effective. It does just work. Even it works across party lines. And so this idea of pre-bunking misinformation, or exposing people to these little these strategies ahead of time, teaching people a bit more does really work. It's just, how do we scale this up? How do we get enough people to believe that they actually need this psychological vaccine, when we can barely get people to take regular vaccines, then it's going to be an uphill battle. And so the thing we can advocate for on a policy level is platforms have to be accountable for what's on their platform. And I think that, I mean, it's a great American tradition to sue people. And right now, Section 230 makes it impossible to sue social media companies. You just basically can't do it. And that was a good thing when the internet was created, right? That, like, basically what Section 230 says is that you can't sue a platform for what's on their platform unless it's posted by them, basically. And that made sense when the internet started. Obviously, no website would be able to exist in the early days if they had to follow, like, oh, well, we have to check every comment, whatever. But at this point, these social media companies are not just platforms. They are content moderators as a service. The way that they organize our information is essentially an editorial decision, like a newspaper or like a broadcasting service. And they should be held responsible for the things that rise to the top of our feed over and over again. That if there's hate and misinformation that is causing a real world damage, then the people who experience that real world damage should be able to sue. That's my opinion on that. But I do think that it would make a big difference to have Section 230 reformed.
I'm curious if you think that, I mean, there was a push in the, going back to 2020, there was a push in trying to fight some level of misinformation and disinformation, which, first and foremost, can you just terminology-wise, there is misinformation, disinformation, and then I see malinformation as well.
Yeah,
I saw like a groan there about malinformation. So I'm curious about these terms and what the differences are between them, and then I'll get back to my other question.
Yeah, so one of the things that's happening right now is people are moving away from all of these terms because they are so politically charged. But I will go through briefly what they are. Misinformation is information that's not true or misleading. The intention behind it doesn't matter necessarily for it to be misinformation. Disinformation is information that's not true or misleading, but the person posting it knows that and is posting it for that reason. So there's a level of intent there, which is always hard to discern what the intent of the poster is. Malinformation is just like bad information. Like, that's sort of like, it can be true, it can be false, but ultimately it's there to sow distrust and to make things more difficult. And then there's now also, I would say, a fourth category of AI slop. That it's just garbage information. It's just not, it's not true, but it's also not like misleading. It's just like on your Facebook feed, there's it's Shrimp Jesus or something, and you're like, why does this exist? But yeah.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up.
It's like the new age shit posting.
Yes.
Basically.
Just like,
Yeah.
But I'm curious, looking back at kind of the efforts that were made, I think there were a lot of people, and I will count myself among them, admittedly, who got frustrated about certain things being flagged at a certain point in time. And I always go back to the COVID thing. I was doing a show back. I have to go back to this because it upset me at the time. But it still kind of does. But I was talking about COVID in 2020 on my former show on Facebook, and I basically said that I thought it was possible that it could have come from a lab in Wuhan. I did not say that was a definitive theory. I said that it was fair to consider that as a theory. I didn't find that to be like some sort of phobia of Asians or anything along those lines, or, trying to spew that. And I got flagged and sent a whole bunch of, like, you're spreading misinformation. They took down the episode. It was a whole big deal that went on. And I, got all kinds of hate from people about this. 5 years later, whatever, like, that's a pretty generally accepted theory, not a definitive thing, but even in the realm of our government, the World Health Organization, they all tend to say that that is at least a possibility that could have happened. That obviously soured me at the time on these kind of flags, because I felt like this was not me, going around trying to spread something false. I suspect that happened to a fair number of people. I suspect that many of them were not, just kind of casually discussing things, but maybe were actually trying to spread, or have an agenda behind what they said. But do you think that impacted where we are now in terms of kind of the backlash that we've seen, particularly on the right, but really from a large portion of people across the country who really got irritated with the idea that Facebook, X, Instagram, Meta, all of that could kind of dictate what is true and what is not true, I guess?
Yeah, I think that absolutely had a big effect on people's souring on misinformation and the whole misinformation space. That and Hunter Biden's laptop were like big fat mistakes that were absolutely the fault of the like misinformation and disinformation community for going too hard and fast on, and frankly not having enough information to disprove something. It's really hard to disprove something. What they probably should have said is that this is an unproven theory in both cases, and instead they said this isn't true, and it's like those are different things. But it's also is difficult because in both cases, the Hunter Biden's laptop was really close to the election, and the COVID stuff was like during what was a major crisis in terms of public health and in terms of just like general information craziness going on. And I do think that is always going to be an issue to a certain degree, is that when there's a crisis, it's very hard to get good information out quickly. And so bad information will get out quickly because they don't have to verify it. And so I don't fully blame social media platforms for being a little aggressive with that, because we just did a whole report recently on extreme weather misinformation. So this is misinformation around like things like the LA wildfires and Hurricane Helene and those sorts of things. And it's difficult because these platforms didn't really do anything about that misinformation as it was coming out, partially because they were like, well, we don't have information to verify it. And so but that means that information was allowed to spread unchecked and genuinely be quite damaging in terms of the FEMA response and in terms of people's understanding of what the LA Fire Department was capable of doing, and people understanding where the causes of these sorts of major events were coming from. And there was an attack on a weather station in Oklahoma because of the floods in Texas recently, because somebody was like, well, it's the weather radars that are controlling it. So there's all kinds of like real world effects to this misinformation coming out so fast. And so there has to be some level of the control from the social media companies to be able to take down stuff, even if it's maybe a little early to do it, if it's a crisis. I don't think necessarily the Wuhan theory or Hunter Biden's laptop were really, truly crises, but I think there are going to be cases of things being taken down that maybe don't deserve to be. And I think I'd rather live in that world. And that's probably going to be an unpopular opinion. But I worry about the effects of, oh, well, we don't know whether that's untrue. And it's like, what do you mean you don't know whether Alex Jones talking about lasers controlling the weather is untrue. Like, and so there will be like, there's going to be extremes. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that question, honestly. I do think that there's just some things that are hard to verify. And I think fact checkers need to do a really careful job of that. And I think that is the solution, is that like, if you are working in that space, that you cannot say something is untrue if what you mean is it's unproven. But I think in terms of being able to control the spread of information during a crisis, particularly information that could cause real world harm, it's difficult.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, you're right. There's no definitive right or wrong answer. And to be clear, like, I would also rather live in that world. Like, I would rather them flag me for that than not be flagging anything at all. I will take that. Right. That's, it's my argument about guns. Like, like all of these things that it's like, I get that you may be a very responsible gun owner, but wouldn't you rather live in a world in which, like, wouldn't you give up some level of your rights in order to prevent someone else who's not responsible from being able to go, shoot children? Right.
To some degree, that is what laws are for, right? Like, maybe you can comfortably drive 70 miles an hour on the freeway, but the speed limit's 45, and like, we all got to drive 45 because one asshole is going to try to drive 60 and kill everybody.
I got in hot water for saying this about older people driving and concerns about that recently, and like how I feel like, that's the same thing. Like, at some point in time, we do have to acknowledge that there is like changes there, and maybe that does mean taking some level of liberty away from some people in order to provide a broader safety. It was just a proposal. It wasn't the platform. Please don't come at me again.
Well, it's like everything. I mean, these things have an appeal process. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that most people should kind of recognize. It's like, some things are harder to appeal than others, for sure. And I think part of the slippery slope that I get concerned about is like when you say like, well, if we have if we just cast a wide net, then making a few mistakes is okay. It concerns me because that's the same argument that Homeland Security makes about the ICE raids, which is concerning because it's like, oh yeah, a few citizens, who cares? Well, actually, that really matters a lot. But the important part within that argument is that things can be appealed, right?
Things can be appealed, and that ultimately, most of these social media companies are not going to take your account down if you post one thing that's not true. In fact, right now, most social media companies are not even going to take the post down if you report it as untrue. So I'm also, at this point, I'm like, social media companies. So one of the things we do as part of our reports a lot of times is we do a section of the report that's called failure to act. And we take a portion of the whatever posts we're talking about, if it's eating disorder posts on YouTube or extreme weather misinformation on X or something like that. We take some proportion of that and we report it to the platform because these are things that violate the platform's policies, and we only draw attention to things that violate the platform's policies. These are not our decisions about what is right and wrong. These are the platform's decisions about what is right and wrong to have on their platform. So we report them to the platform. And so far in my time at CCDH, the highest number I've seen taken down was around 17%. It's just so low. Most of the time it's around 3 to 5% are taken down. So it's not, this is, right now, I think we are well on the other side of this issue, where things are, some of the stuff we're reporting is like, I want to shoot all Muslims or things like that, where you're like, that's just hate speech. That's fully that's threatening hate speech, incitement of violence even. That should be taken down and yet is allowed to remain on the platform. So I think right now I'm not super concerned about casting too wide a net. I think if anything, we are on the other side of that. And hey, maybe that pendulum will swing the other way, and then we'll be having this conversation again in 2 years and be like, hey, yeah, the platforms are really, really over-policing. I think that's unlikely, but that's my
Yeah,
opinion
I
on that.
mean, if they're over policing in the near future, it feels like they would be over policing for a specific purpose, and that's another kind of big concern I think I have. But I am curious, what can everyday users do when they come across content that is clearly misleading or harmful like that? Um, do reports and flags actually make a difference at this point?
Community
Yeah,
notes.
community notes, like all of that.
Yeah.
Like, is this making any dent
Yeah.
at all?
Like, no. But I think it's worth reporting. I think it's important to have some record of that platforms are failing to protect their users. And that can only happen if users speak out about what it is they think is bad, what it is that they think that crosses that line. So I do think it's worth reporting. The community notes are. I could go on for hours about just community notes, because now Meta's switching to them, and they just don't work. They don't work. And I wanted them to work. I was so excited about the idea of community notes back when it was like came out as Birdwatch or whatever, like way back when. And they were like community-led fact checks. I was like, that's brilliant, because you know what? People do not trust fact checkers. That has been shown in the research over and over and over again. Is that people are much more willing to trust their fellow man than they are fact checkers, because somehow fact checkers aren't their fellow men, which is a whole nother thing. But but community notes just don't work, because the issue is that the way that the algorithm works is that they only are shown to users if enough users that have different opinions from each other say this is a helpful note. And so what we're finding is that we did a report on political misinformation, and we found that like the vast majority of community notes were not shown to users, because on a controversial topic there is no consensus, and that's where misinformation thrives, is in controversial topics. So like it's just not a system that works. I want it to. I would love if we could have a community driven like sense of truth and justice, but in a community as polarized as the one we live in, it's actively failing. So yeah, well, that was not a very hopeful answer. The thing you can do is don't share information you're not sure of, and do share information that you believe in. Share fact checks. Share science influencers that you really trust and agree with. Like, share the factual communicators that you care about. I can't tell you my social media is like, it's just my personal social media now. But I can't tell you the amount of people who've reached out to me and been like, I'm so glad you shared this. I had no idea. Or I'm so glad you shared this. I totally believed that. And it's just me sharing fact checks from other reputable sources. So I think it's worth sharing good information, and it's worth really slowing down and verifying before you share information that you're not sure of.
Yeah, I'm glad you ended with that, because we want to end on something more hopeful, right? We want to give some people options, which is really our whole goal with this podcast. We want to give people tools to use moving forward in their daily life, to help combat this issue, this widespread issue. It feels like it's only getting worse, and now that more and more powerful people are kind of involving themselves in the spread of misinformation. But in your work, are there any recent wins that you could highlight? Any circumstances in which you saw an actual glimmer of hope that we can really put down misinformation apparatuses?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned this a bit earlier, but the UK's Online Safety Act, the EU's Digital Services Act are big steps in the right direction. Both require platforms to assess and mitigate systemic risks like hate and disinformation, and particularly harms to children, which I think is harms to children is, I think, one of the best ways to convince people on both sides of the political spectrum that this is important stuff to do. That ultimately our YouTube report, which was on eating disorders, we were the all the information and the videos we found, videos that were showing things like 100 calorie a day diets or eating disorder diets, just calling them straight up eating disorder diets. Videos like that were all accessible to 13-year-old girl accounts. And they were recommending more of this kind of video if you watched one of these videos. And that kind of stuff, I think, really hits people in a way that does make a difference. I'm seeing more legislation from people on the right about this like sort of harms to children angle, and I think that is a real angle where we can have some success. We've had little successes as well that are a bit more like random bits and pieces. We published a report on Midjourney generating election disinformation quite easily. You could quite easily generate pictures of Trump and Biden, and a week later they announced that they would no longer allow you to generate pictures of Trump and Biden before the election. The platforms do respond to being called out, not as much as we'd like them to, but they don't like bad press, and so it's worth trying to hold these platforms accountable, trying to make there be costs. We saw a bunch of advertisers leave X at the beginning of when Elon Musk took over, because there was a bunch of civil society organizations that were publishing how much worse hate speech on the platform had gotten. And I think, as much as there has been some setbacks, like with Meta's policy changes at the beginning of this year, I think we are going to see the OSA and the DSA really improve researcher access to these platforms. And I think that will improve awareness about the harms that these big tech companies perpetrate. If we can actually get better and bigger information and know what the platforms know about what they're doing. We keep seeing whistleblowers from these companies come out and say, yeah, we knew what we were doing the whole time. And we can't keep letting people get away with it. If they are taking advantage of our feelings and our emotions and the vulnerabilities, again, of children to sell products and to make money, then there has to be a change. That kind of behavior it wouldn't be allowed from any other type of company, and yet we are willingly giving away our information to be manipulated right now. And so I think that awareness is changing, and that is getting better, and people are caring. And I think that is the first step in terms of actually making bigger changes.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This is fantastic. I can't, on behalf of our listeners, on behalf of Tyler and myself, and behalf of everyone, first and foremost, thank you for the work that you are doing to combat this, existential threat to us. And I personally feel a lot better knowing that there are people like yourself who are out there working on this, who are understanding this, researching, and trying to find new strategies for us to move forward in a safer means of sharing information.
I imagine a lot of people probably don't even realize that there's institutions like yours that even do this. I speak to a lot of people who talk about misinformation and the fears of AI's involvement in expanding misinformation and stuff. I mean, what are we going to do? It's hopeless, right? It's just going to be all AI slop and misinformation everywhere. And I think companies like Center for Countering Digital Hate are kind of unsung heroes in a way. I don't see people talking about companies like yours doing these things, and I think that's really important that people recognize and realize that there are mechanisms that are moving to help counter this stuff. Because I think a lot of people feel hopeless that it's them versus misinformation, them as an individual versus misinformation, and that not only leads to like we said earlier, a lot of the conversations that might end up feeling belittling, right? Or feeling angry because they're like, well, I'm the only person that's doing anything about it. So I'm just going to go out and tell people that they're dumb and stop doing this because it feels like it's them versus this. And they're losing. So it's great to hear, and it's great to kind of share the story of and the mission of companies like yours to more people so that they know that they're not alone in the fight against misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. You are not alone. There's lots of organizations like CCDH fighting the good fight.
Well, on that note, we will leave it there. And thank you again, Alex. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. Would love to have you back on at some point. If you're willing, we appreciate you sharing the time with us and with our listeners.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, and so we're going to move on to our favorite segment, things we should all agree on.
Jesse, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll get started here. So, I feel like I really need to talk about the scandal that is gripping the nation right now. It is
Epstein, right?
No, not Epstein. No, it is the Sydney Sweeney American Eagle ad. Because apparently we've reached the point where a denim pun is a threat to the moral fabric of society. Now, you've probably seen it, or maybe you haven't, which is fine, because this controversy is far more online than real life. This ad features the actor Sydney Sweeney, blonde, blue-eyed, conventionally attractive, with the tagline, "Sydney Sweeney has good genes." Emphasis on the pun, jeans with a J. Denim. But sure, if you're in the mood...
She's also wearing jeans in the ad.
She is also wearing jeans in the ad. Let's make that clear. But sure, if you're in the mood for making yourself angry, you can read it as being some sort of right-wing Nazi messaging, and then, boom, you have spiraled into an accusation that this ad is somehow, and I quote, pro-eugenics. Yes, eugenics. Because of a pun. Now, I'm not going to pretend that Hollywood doesn't have issues with beauty standards. Of course it does. Of course people like Sydney Sweeney benefit from quote-unquote conventional attractiveness, just like Glenn Powell does, or Regé-Jean Page, or Sabrina Carpenter. The list goes on and on. Any other number of actors or musicians or pop stars whose faces and bodies are shaped in ways that most of us will never replicate. And that is a worthy conversation. Representation matters, diversity in beauty matters. But this faux outrage over a bad pun in a denim ad, this is not it. John McWhorter is a Columbia University professor and a very, very gifted writer and linguist. And he wrote in the New York Times opinion post, I think he captured this perfectly. He said, quote, "People from both left and right tell us what we are not allowed to say for reasons that feel more performative than urgent. We grapple with a willfully tricky and ever-accreting volume of etiquette. Language changes. Culture changes. Labels are reassigned. And a blonde, blue-eyed actress talking about jeans, or even jeans with a G, is just a bad pun, not a secret salute to white supremacy," end quote. And that's exactly how I feel about this whole scandal and controversy. This wasn't a dog whistle, it was a dad joke. And the fact that some people want to interpret it as some kind of covert ideological assault says more about the need to feel morally superior than it does about the ad itself. What's frustrating to me is that this kind of performative anger, and that's what it is, doesn't resonate with most people. It alienates. It makes legitimate activism look ridiculous. Because while people are arguing about a jeans pun, there are real life issues that are being ignored. Kids are starving in Gaza. Our education system is being infiltrated and manipulated. Rights are being rolled back. But we're choosing to fixate on an okay actor who screams a lot being in a denim ad as a cultural threat? Yes, we should critique unrealistic beauty standards. Yes, we should champion inclusivity. But no, we don't need to spiral into outrage every time someone acknowledges that certain features are conventionally attractive. And yes, acknowledging attraction doesn't mean we're endorsing exclusion or oppression. It just means we have eyes. I know that I'm never going to look like Glenn Powell. I don't find that offensive. I find it fine. That's life. Attraction isn't a conscious decision any more than who we love is. It's shaped partly by society, sure, but it's not entirely created by it. We can recognize cultural influence without pretending every expression of preference is a political declaration. So maybe we can save the outrage for the things that matter, and maybe, just maybe, we can let the denim pun slide.
Great. And I want to piggyback on a few things you said.
Sure.
Because you talk about the unrealistic beauty standards and all that, right? And in a way, that's an issue. It's been an issue in America specifically, but it's been an issue globally, especially in most, developed first world countries, in the expectations that we place mostly upon young women, but young men as well, about what is beauty and what it means to be beautiful. But, if you ask me, this controversy is not about critiquing beauty standards. I don't think the people doing this who are like, oh my God, she's pro-eugenics, I don't think that is about beauty standards at all. Because that's not what they're like. Because here's the thing, is that if you ask me, and maybe this is a little controversial of a take on this specific incident, but if you ask me, I think this is another example of people who have been and actively are constantly looking to be victims of something. I think it's people who are reading into things so intently because they desire something to not only be angry at, but they desire to be a victim of something. And they want that so that they can because that somehow gives them a voice to speak out against whatever. And in some instances, we've seen that be somewhat truthful, right? But in many, like this instance, it's just a bunch of BS, and it hurts the global argument against actual eugenics, against actual problems that you are claiming this is. If you're saying this is about, the issue with unrealistic beauty standards in modern society, you can say that. It's not. There is a problem with unrealistic beauty standards in modern society. This is not it. You are hurting the global argument against that problem by focusing on something kind of asinine like this. You're hurting the actual fight against actual pro-eugenics people and movements by claiming this is somehow pro-eugenics. It's the same thing, we talked about misinformation this whole episode, right? But when people are looking into things so intently, right, that they're claiming misinformation as a way to as further evidence for their crusade, whether it's against Trump, whether it's against Democrats, whatever, right? Using misinformation and using kind of dumb arguments that don't have any weight, it just hurts the big argument. It hurts the movement. That is more dangerous to society than you probably think when you're making a dumb little post about how somehow Sweeney is now like a pro eugenics, like crazy, like fucking alt right Nazi or whatever you want to say, right? Like that's ridiculous. What irritates me most about this specific issue, right? And I want to call it like it's such a small, stupid thing. But what upsets me most about this is that like I have had real conversations. I have had real arguments with people who have made actual, real pro-eugenics arguments. Horrifying, horrific, disgusting, scary things. Like things that made my skin crawl. And I've tried to fight that. I've had debates with these people. It is scary. But it's not like this. It is not. It is not. People, like, there's a difference between making a pun like this and being like, oh, haha, whatever, it's silly. And what is actually pro-eugenics, which is, and people should understand, like, eugenics is the belief that certain people should not procreate, and in the worst cases, should not exist because of certain genetic identifiers, right? And there are people who are like, hey, this person A, has genes that make them susceptible to, you know, some disorder or problem, right? Something, some medical issue. And as a result, that person should not have children with this person. Or, hey, like, you know, when this specific, you know, racial group, you know, has a child with someone of a different racial group, that somehow creates a child that is prone to having some sort of issue, right? And as a result, those people should not procreate. That is pro-eugenics. That is the argument that these people make. That is disgusting. It's horrifying. It's horrific. It's every negative word under the sun. But that is also not what this ad is saying. And there has to be a differentiation between the two. You cannot just lump everything together and say, oh, it's, you know, enter negative buzzword here. Because then what happens when we're faced with people who are actually pro-eugenics, who are actually making the real arguments?
It's the boy who cried wolf, basically. That's what this feels like. It's like you're claiming something is something when it's really not. And then when it actually happens, you have desensitized all of us to that term. And so we've talked about that with the term violence before. You know, people referring to certain actions as violent, and that desensitizes us to that term, to when there is actual violence, you know, we're not as drawn or concerned to it. But I do think that the one thing that I am, you know, that I see consistently in this, and one of the reasons I think this is happening, it's twofold. One is that there are a lot of people who are looking for any evidence that companies are like going anti-woke. And I find this to be really, like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I find this like hunting out of these companies that are anti-woke to be silly. Like, you want to...
Well, it hurts, like, it hurts the movement.
Yeah.
It hurts the argument.
Yeah.
I cannot, like, if people are doing this, and yes, they might not be directly involved with me or you, but their crusade in chasing after these, like, nothing burgers hurts us actually making real arguments against the real problems.
Yeah.
Because then what happens? We've seen this happen. They point to those big, loud people who are making nothing burger arguments and saying, well, look, these people are all they're just looking for a reason to like, you know, to say we're this or we're that. And that, you know, that hurts our argument when our argument is obviously much more salient, right? In this kind of hypothetical situation, but a very real situation that happens across the board, right? You know, Trump can point to this. Trump does this all the time. He can point to specific instances in which, like, people were kind of grasping at straws.
Yeah.
Right? And trying to put them down. And he sues them. And he wins.
Yeah.
Because they were grasping at straws. And he uses that as a way to say, look, all these people, all of them, they're all grasping at straws. Because one person did it. And you know what? It's effective.
It won him the election. Like, let's be real. Like, that strategy of pinpointing the most ridiculous things that people on the far left, or the most ridiculous aspects of quote unquote woke culture, led to a lot of people being like, I just don't want to associate with people like that. And to be honest, I get it. When you see something like this, and you see somebody freaking out about an ad, inherently, my instinct is like, okay, like I don't want anything to do with the people who are freaking out calling this eugenics. Like, that's silly. But I have to say, the other aspect of this whole story to me is specifically about Sydney Sweeney herself, who has family members who are MAGA people. And as such, the MAGA movement wants to say that Sydney Sweeney is like a champion of MAGA. Obviously there's people on the left who are actively angry that she hasn't like publicly condemned her parents for having that MAGA birthday party. I think that's bizarre. Why? You could never get me to have a birthday party. I'm an Obama person. I love Obama. Would I ever have an Obama-themed birthday party? Like, it's so strange to me, but whatever. She doesn't have to condemn her family. This whole podcast is about, like, don't shun people just because you have a difference of opinion with them. And so it feels like there's a lot of people who are angry with her and see her, they assume that she must feel this way, the same way. And I don't know. I've never seen anything, and I don't care. I don't care what Sydney Sweeney thinks about politics. She's not not involved in any sort of political movements, to my knowledge. So I don't care.
Being guilty of association, all that does is alienate the person who you're accusing. Because you don't know what they're thinking. They might hate that shit. They might be like, man, I hate being the only like left-leaning person in a right-leaning family. I can't speak my mind because that might quite literally endanger me. I don't know. It depends on the situation, right? But if you aren't actively saying, like, I hate my family because they're this, because they're different, like, I ostracize them, and you're publicly speaking that to the world, shouting from a mountaintop, if you don't do that, to a lot of people, you're guilty by association. And that is such a dangerous rhetoric to have. Because then, like, what are you doing?
How are we supposed to bring anyone back? All you're doing is pushing people further away. And I think that's all this controversy and this nonsense about this has done, is just create more divides between the vast majority of people who look at that ad and say, that's a stupid pun. We all recognize that she's conventionally attractive and she's wearing jeans. Haha, move on. To the other, like, small segment of the population that says that this is a political statement about, that American Eagle is choosing to denounce wokeism and all. That's ridiculous.
It's so silly. And I think, obviously we're a politics podcast, so politics is going to be everything we talk about. But I think it's important to note, not everyone cares about politics like we do. Mm-hmm. And like you probably do, you as the audience members. Mm-hmm. I get more people are like, hey, everyone needs to be involved in politics now because it's so important and because it's a danger and all these things. I get that. I get, like, the desire for everyone to want to be involved in politics because it feels like it is so much closer to home than ever before. But the reality is, not everyone will. The reality is a lot of people will not give a shit. And is that going to sound like they're entitled? Maybe a little bit. Sure, maybe there's a little privilege involved in that. Yeah, okay. But at the end of the day, there are people who aren't going to care. That's just the reality. The reality is there are people who are like, I'm not political. I don't give a shit.
Yep.
Whatever. And if you ostracize them for that, all you're doing is pushing them away from your political side. Because now they're saying, oh, wow. And it's going to happen more often probably from the left than the right, I would imagine. That's just my personal experience with them. I could be wrong. But in my experience, I see left-leaning people who are like, you have to be political. Like, it's, endangering to, like, our rights, da-da-da. It's like, yes, that's true. It is, hard. It is very close to home, all these things. But if you're looking at someone who's apolitical and doesn't really want to involve themselves in politics and would rather just be left alone, which is their right, and you're saying like, you have to join us, and you're shaking your hands and you're saying like, why aren't you angry like me? What is going to be their interpretation and their perspective now on the political divide? When what they're seeing is you, a proud left-leaning person, screaming at them, telling them, join me or else you are evil Nazi. Mm-hmm. What do you think they're going to do? You think they're going to join you? Out of fear now? Oh, God, I guess I have to do that now. No, of course they're not going to do that. They're going to say, these people are crazy. Like, that, I'm going to go over there because they're not crazy. Yeah. Or they're going to say, I'm going to stay exactly where I am. I'm do absolutely nothing. And to you, that's effectively the same thing. So apparently, it's just a lose-lose. Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it. Maybe this is just my things we can all agree on. We've gone long enough anyway. You gotta stop with the anger at apolitical people, man. Like, just stop that. Like, people are allowed to not have strong opinions on things.
Yes.
It's
In
okay.
fact, I encourage that. Please, don't have strong opinions. I have enough strong opinions. You have enough strong opinions. There are plenty of us who have strong opinions. I'm perfectly fine with people who are kind of like, yeah.
And you know what? As someone with strong opinions on a lot of things, there are plenty of things I don't have strong opinions on. And a lot of those things are actually political. And that's okay. Much like a single issue voter might, there's plenty of things where I'm kind of like, I see the pros and cons of these things here and these things there. And, whether it swings right, swings left, I just have less than powerful, less than strong opinions on that. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay to look at like a specific tax policy and be like, well, I see some pros and cons to that. Whatever. It's like, I'm not going to die on the hill of a very specific tax policy. Whatever. That's okay. Save your voice for what matters to you. I'm allowed to have non-opinions on things, and so are you, and so is everybody else. Not everyone has to be a crusader.
It's a great point. Last thing I have on the Sydney Sweeney controversy is just a clarification. Again, it says Sydney Sweeney has good genes. Not better genes. Not amazing genes. Like, Sydney Sweeney has good genes. Call me back when it says Sydney Sweeney has superior genes. Then we can have a discussion.
Oh, yes.
But that's not what it says. Look, eugenics is a serious topic. Let's have a serious conversation if we're going to discuss that topic, because you're absolutely right. There are people who talk about this in a way that is disgusting. And that's not what this was. And I don't think that any normal person looks at it that way. And, I get that people are trying to, to find something to be upset about. As you said, there is a victim culture here where it's like, I want to call this out. And if we're talking about conventional attractiveness, we're all victims in comparison to someone like Sydney Sweeney. We're all victims if that's what we're talking about,
Speak for yourself, man. I am hot. I don't care.
You know what? Body positivity, I applaud it. I do. I really do. Anyway. Well,
Sydney
thank you
Sweeney,
all.
come on the pod.
Yeah. Oh, God.
We'll have you the week after Chuck Schumer.
All right. Well, I think that's enough of that. Thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. And thank you again to Alex Johnson from the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Wow, what a fantastic interview, honestly. Like, I learned a lot. I hope all of you learned a lot. Please share this. If you don't want to listen to us, that's one thing. But share what Alex had to say today with everyone, because we all need to be more in touch with what the issue is relating to misinformation, what the broader concerns are, as well as the things we can do. And, of course, if you don't know if something is true or not, don't share it. Please don't share it. Verify
Research.
Yes, please.
And don't trust AI. Don't trust AI.
If you see a video of a bridge collapsing in China with a whole bunch of people falling through, and you don't see a news story about it. Hate to break it to you, it's AI. You probably could have told that by the face of the woman in the back who's like malformed halfway through. Like, that's not genes. That has nothing to do with genes. That's AI.
You know what? If you're on Facebook and you're like, wow, I didn't know they had a sunburn competition in like backwoods Louisiana, which is something I literally saw on Facebook. I was like, maybe check your sources. Maybe check the source a little bit, because they definitely do not do that.
Yeah,
there's definitely not a sunburn competition.
The grease pole competition in Gloucester, Mass. That is real, though. So
I wish that was AI.
I kind of wish that was AI as well. Gloucester's a fantastic, beautiful place. You will never see me there to watch the grease pole competition. Anyway, all right. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it. Thanks again, Alex Johnson. From Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Erg.
And this has been another episode of United States.
When the whole world has got you down, and there's no one else around, turn that frown right upside